All right, good afternoon, and thanks a lot for joining us today. Really excited to host this panel today. I've heard a lot about, and for those of you that were at this morning's plenary, there's a lot said about grids, and the fact that grids are at the center of everything. And from a Schneider Electric perspective, obviously we work with data centers, we work with homes, we work with different C&I applications, but in the end, it only works if you have a healthy grid. And so part of what we wanted to talk about today is unpacking just that. And one other thing that I would come back on is there was a lot of said today around partners and ecosystems. And so as I look here at the fellow panelists that I have, there are partners, and then there is ultimately an ecosystem of different value chain partners that need to come together in order to address this very big amount of a challenge that we had ahead of us in terms of modernizing the grid. So with that, that's what we'll talk about over the next 45 minutes. I want to introduce my panelists. So before I do that, my name is Ruben Llanes. I work for Schneider Electric, have responsibility for our digital grid business. Secondly, Jason Glickman, EVP of Engineering, Planning and Strategy at PG&E. His role runs the gamut from strategy, innovation, and capital planning, all the way down to the point of a truck roll. He's been with PG&E for a little over 5 years, and just before that was with Bain for 15. So thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you.
Niraj Joshi, CTO for Worldwide Energy and Resources at Microsoft. Has been with Microsoft for over 2 decades, quite an accomplishment, and leads in-depth technical collaborations to drive digital transformation within the energy sector. And last but not the least, Jennifer Obertino has responsibility as the Global Energy Practice Lead for AECOM, responsible for developing the strategy and growth for a team of over 9,000 energy practitioners globally, and has over 30 years of practical experience in public and private sectors with a primary focus on the environment, energy, and civil infrastructure. Thanks for being with us today. So we have a packed agenda. I want to make sure that we can leave some time for questions if we get there. So I want to go ahead and dive right in. So we saw a lot of stats. So a lot of the stats over the past couple of days where we've looked at some of the challenges that are facing grid operators today. So one around massive load growth, another around aging infrastructure, and you can go down electrification. And so as part of that, I thought rather than just talk at a very high level, having a customer and a utility sitting on the panel, I want to ask you first, Jason, if you would, give us a little bit of context, maybe one or two things that you think rise to the top around what is some of the biggest challenges facing PG&E.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, one, Ruben, thanks again for having us. I think that there's a broad challenge that I think virtually every planning and operating assumption that we've used to run the electric system for 100 plus years has been challenged. One that I see, I think, often framed as a challenge, but what we really see as opportunity is managing the peak. PG&E, we're about a 20 gigawatt wires peak. We hit our all-time system peak in September 2022 with a prolonged heat wave. Folks who live in Northern California remember that when we hit, I think, 22 and some gigawatts. But our average load is about a 10 gigawatt load. So we're less than or about 50% utilized over the course of a year. And we're not alone in that. I'm an industrial engineer by training, so systems engineering. And I just think about what other industry that's capital intensive and asset intensive would accept a less than 50% utilization of the capital stock. There isn't one, right? And so one of the things that's really interesting to us is when people say, well, there's not capacity, there's not power, how are you going to bring all these data centers online? There's actually a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of room for growth with better planning and orchestration where we can either, guide or direct the loads to where there's the right electric and gas infrastructure alongside land and other resources, to where we can do, flexible connection options and working with our partners like at Schneider to, very modestly flex loads. I don't like the word curtailment, modestly flex loads a few hours a year, maybe 30, 40 max hours a year out of 87, 60. I just think there's a huge opportunity there for us to fundamentally use this system much more efficiently than we have in the past. So we'd love to see as a breakthrough goal, how do we get that 50% utilization up to 60, 65, 70, or even 80%?
How far are you, just to one follow-up, how far along are you in trying to achieve that next level?
We're in the very early innings, I would say, from an opportunity perspective. I would say, there's specific customers where, I can think about an example where we work with a DC fast charging infrastructure provider to go flex, their loads, because our summer peak is not coincident with their holiday travel peak. And so we can manage that very effectively. I think about a data center customer that we just signed up that was not in kind of the historical geographic core of the Bay Area. By working collaboratively with them, we found another spot on our system that worked for them and worked for us. And so I would say it's more than opportunistic, but right now it's isolated, and we really want to push that at scale.
Very clear, very clear. Good. And so I guess two vectors that I want to go down now as I think about grid modernization. So it's turn to you, Niraj. In terms of digital applications, so clearly the bailiwick of Microsoft, can you talk a little bit about hybrid cloud and how that is kind of playing into the way that you guys are thinking about?
I think it's a great segue into, we see a skyrocketing demand coming through our utilities from across the world. We don't even say it as an on-prem or a cloud. It's a sort of it's a hybrid is the right way, and it's a ramp, right? So we sort of term it as the adaptive cloud, right? So how do sort of systems who have SCADA systems at edge, how do they connect to the broader ecosystem, right? So we now think of the grid as the nervous system of an electrifying world, and how do we sort of connect it and build out a broader grid intelligence story together with partners like Schneider, and sort of build on that data ecosystem and then derive intelligence on top of that, right? So AI is an expression of what we call as the base knowledge, but the base knowledge has to sort of span not just one or two systems, but the gamut of systems which are ranging from edge, on-prem, as well as to the cloud.
Yeah, very good, very good. And I guess the next question I'd have, Jennifer, would be for you. So there's this notion, I think maybe historically people have looked a lot at hardware upgrades. And so there's a hardware vector of this, or there's also a digital aspect of this. This is something that AECOM has been thinking a lot about, I think, as I've had conversations with you. So can you talk about that arc of going from hardware-centric towards progressively into digital and what that looks like?
Absolutely. And Ruben, again, thank you. And thank you for everyone for joining this panel. And so you're absolutely correct. And, leading from some of the other discussion points, we do look at the hardware piece, right? And making sure that there's a resilient solution that can add capacity, but then also looking at the digital solution and bringing our engineers together that may be looking more at a traditional investment in the hardware. Then how do you mirror that and marry that in with the digital solution because of supply chain challenges or capital investment challenges? And the digital solution is smarter, and hand in hand, it develops out the best solution. And as Jason was talking about, being able to flex some of that load and really capitalizing on the investment through, looking at some of the distribution systems and, tying that in with some storage and other generation resources too. So it's really, as you indicated, it's a systematic approach. And if you were in here earlier, the panel before, talking about workforce, that's part of the discussion too, where, we've got our engineers that are used to developing a hardware solution and not necessarily integrating. And then you've got our digital folks that are thinking about it, and it's like, we don't even need that investment. So, bringing those teams together is sometimes quite exciting.
It can be. Yeah, so change management is something that I hear a lot about. Mm-hmm. So you have these kind of historical silos of IT, OT, and you can kind of go down the list of any other types of silos. Jason, can you talk a little bit about that? So maybe from a change management control within PG&E, what does that evolution over time look like, and how do you bring people along for this grid modernization journey?
Well, I'll pick up on that, and then also, Jennifer, your comments really resonated. I think I'll just offer a couple examples that are very real for us. I remember one of the first sites I went to when I joined PG&E in 2021 was a remote grid. And so our remote grids are these microgrids that go to the most isolated parts of our service area where other forms of wildfire mitigation and system hardening are just not, are cost prohibitive or not physically possible. And so in this instance, it was 4 customers at the end of a line that had burned down in a fire that wasn't caused by us near Yosemite. And so we created this remote grid with a bunch of solar, batteries, propane, et cetera. This thing's more reliable, cleaner, same cost as grid service. And we have a speak up platform at PG&E, which we love, called the Corrective Action Program or platform, where folks see something, they say something, we track it, we close it out. Well, I got one of these directed to me that said, the remote grid team didn't follow our engineering design standards. And I was like, that was the point. That was the whole point. The whole point was we don't actually have a design standard for this, and we've got to innovate our way out of it. I think that bringing folks together and giving them the freedom to think about other tools is so vital. And so that diversity, I think the biggest thing in the change management is helping people live alongside the traditional solutions and new solutions so they can see it with their own eyes. I think bringing that diversity of thought and experience together, that cross-disciplinary engineering of electrical, civil, industrial, advanced analytics is so key. I could pick any number of applications where that's the case, but that's been one of the things for us is really that orientation towards the diversity of thinking, the observation. And then I will also say one of the things that's very different from a change perspective where we are in this industry right now is it is not a fixed pie or a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. We are growing like crazy. I cannot hire and train enough engineers to do all the work we need to do. And so part of this is shifting the mindset and orientation. Like, look, we go find a way to be twice as productive or get you doing more value-added work. No one's livelihood is threatened.
Yeah.
And so that's a big shift is trying to help emphasize that for thousands of engineers who've never lived in a growth environment.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, Ruben, if I can just add to that. So Jason, you talked about your internal change management and the standards or the engineering guidelines when we're dealing with our partners. So, if you're trying to get a permit or get approval because we're, making some improvement in the roadway because of a line crossing, working with the adjacent and the regulatory folks where, again, their response is, this does not follow, what we've been doing for the last 30 years. And to your point, Jason, we can't, right? Because there is such a demand and the workload and the backlog is there too. So thinking about how we can be more innovative. So we've done that a lot too, where we've worked with our partners to understand, here is the overall project program. Here's why we need to get there and how we can help you develop out some of those, innovative, thoughtful ways to come up with solutions that still meet their requirements, but maybe quicker, faster.
Very clear. From a talent perspective, let's just tug on that just a little bit more. So from an enablement perspective, or getting people from one place to another, so you've heard obviously a lot about AI in terms of using that as a method by which to augment some of what workers need to do in their environment. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? Maybe we'll start first with you, Niraj.
Sure. I think we have a running joke that I don't get paid unless I say AI. Now I think it's more like
drinking game, I think.
Yeah. But I think AI is, of course, in forefront of all of our global consciousness for the last, especially 2 years. I would posit it's been there for 50 years. So AI is not something new which has been invented. It's probably an expression of the business value around the data sets we have, right, and how fast we can get through it. The change which it has done is it's another tool, right? So the jobs are not going to be taken by AI, but the jobs will be taken by people who know how to use AI, right? So it's up to us around how fast we can retrain and reskill ourselves and leverage the tool in the right way, shape, or form, right? Microsoft, in my 2 decades, we first started with an on-prem world, fully in a data center, doing higher-end databases, whereas now it's sort of the second or third level of digital transformation. It's not just to the cloud, but to an AI world, where our pace of change is every 3 months. We are sort of coming up with something new with our partners, with, at, I would say, AI scale. And the aspect around is around a growth mindset. Just we have to sort of go in with it, recognize what's real, but also making sure we are learning from our failures as well as our successes, right? And that's the part where it's not just Microsoft, but we have to take our customers or partners together in their journey and be flexible to have each of those at different points of their AI maturity journey. That's where we even released a report a year ago called the Frontier Workforce Report. It's a fascinating one, right, regarding how we see the AI maturity curve, or when AI becomes your workforce agents, as well as in an autonomous world where an agentic AI will take shape or form, right? It was heartening to see some of these same echoed in the plenary today. So, fascinating to see our mutual journeys along this stretch of time.
Yeah.
And this is perfect for us. We are announcing this week as far as some of the tools, the AI tools that we're utilizing, because we're at capacity, right? And all of our consultant peers, we're all at capacity, and it's kind of a cannibalistic environment right now where there's only so many engineers that you can, that are in the pool, and we keep hiring away. And so with the AI tools, what that's allowing us to do is to grab some of that addressable market that no one has the capacity for. And so to the point that we're just working smarter, right? And Jason had made the point, we're engineers now that are working in a growth market, at an incredible growth market. And so allowing our teams to have more capacity to do the work that's exciting and not necessarily the work that is the mundane, right? And having the interaction and developing those solutions, and some of those iterations that occur are done quickly. But you still need it, and like you said, it's the future is all of us that are utilizing AI. And I'll be the first to say, I think I'm the smartest person in the world now, because I go, to our AI tools, I'm like, help me, what do I need to say? And bam. And it's like, wow, that would have taken me days to come up with. So, AI is developing part of the challenge as far as the load demand, but it's also developing the solutions too.
Yeah. And if we shift from workforce augmentation, and then, Jason, maybe coming back to you, if we then look at AI applications, going back to the grid modernization challenge, how are you, give me maybe an example or two of use cases where you're using it to help address that challenge?
Well, the spot where we've made the most progress, I would say certainly, and I would argue, are world-class capabilities by necessity in wildfire mitigation. We've got hundreds of cameras blanketed in our service area. We have weather stations where we can see what we think is going to happen within a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer square. When we face a wind event, we're able to very surgically think about where we're going to de-energize the grid at a specific time, place, for which customers, notify them, successfully de-energize them, ride through the event, inspect it, make it safe, and get them back online. The progress of that from where we started in 2019, when I was a PG&E customer. I've been a PG&E customer for 25 years and spent 2.5 days out. It is astonishing. I think the thing for us now is, how do we take that same level of sense of urgency and creativity and curiosity. Curiosity is one of our virtues as a company, bring it to spaces where it's not our backs against the wall and life or death. And so I think, broadly speaking, the space of load management, and going back to my earlier comments, not to be a broken record, but unleashing the utilization of the grid and the choreography of all of these devices and loads at the edge is, to me, a huge breakthrough opportunity for AI. You're talking about an industry that operates at the speed of light. Talk about, the role that storage is playing, which I think we're barely scratching the surface of, frankly, as an industry. I just think there's a huge opportunity for AI to intelligently route and flex loads and make this system much, much more efficient.
Yep. Interesting. I guess, so if we go down kind of this, the massive load growth and demand, Jennifer, maybe I'll ask you, if you look at distributed generation, what are you seeing in that respect from a project perspective as, maybe a data center operator, you have another CNI that are looking to get connected as quickly as possible and get access? How have you seen that play out over time?
So, and thank you. So what we're seeing is basically energy centers, right? Behind the meter energy centers, either for a data center, for manufacturing, or a combination of, or a campus. And what they're looking at is what's their immediate, right? How can they immediately provide power and energy? And so, a lot of folks are turning to gas power generation, tied in with solar, battery storage, and then looking at nuclear for the long term. And so that, is a whole new, I don't want to say problem, but challenge, right? Because just from a permitting standpoint, you're going from, gas power tying in with that solar, but then nuclear takes it to a whole nother level. And again, supply chain is the biggest challenge that we're seeing from gas power. And we've seen a lot of innovation where, there's refurbishment of old turbines. There's actually, and I was just talking about this on another panel last week, I don't want to say it's a black market, but there's a secondary market of investors who have already secured turbines, and then their deal falls through, and they sell their turbines for such an incredible profit. It's like, holy smokes, right? Or it's the refurbishment. And so I think it's very interesting. There is, depending on, especially in the U.S., but from a global perspective, there is, investment in consideration into geothermal now too, which we have not heard much about in the past. And like Jason said, we have not scratched the surface on batteries. I think that's, and hydrogen has fallen off a bit, but the gas power, if we can find some combined fuels, I think it'll come back. But that's the immediate speed to market is really driving this model that we're seeing right now.
Can I make a piggyback on something Jennifer was talking about, and that we're really focused on? The opportunity with all this data center growth. Again, I'll hit it again, but to drive more load and utilize the fixed investment in the infrastructure more effectively and lower cost for all is a generational opportunity. A big concern we have, and what we also see as an opportunity, is making sure that any of that distributed generation doesn't result in redundant infrastructure and doesn't create a situation where folks are self-serving and we actually get the opposite impact of that beneficial or rate-reducing load growth, right? We get the load growth, we don't grow the infrastructure at the same rate. It can put downward pressure on rates for all if we get the data centers online in the right way. If we don't, I think the early signposts we're seeing in terms of community and stakeholder pushback on these will turn into a significant opposition that makes it very, very difficult to bring this load online in the United States broadly and in specific locations. And so our metric for the board, on our CEO's scorecard, on mine and my teams, we call it beneficial load growth or rate reducing load growth. We are not going to bring on a single megawatt of data center load that we don't think can reduce pressure on rates overall. But if we're going to do that, one of the things we need is for folks bringing on backup or distributed generation is that maybe you use it for speed to power. So we look at, I know our friends at Microsoft have used reciprocating gas engines. You use that as speed to power to ramp, and then you convert that into a backup resource or a load modifying resource that can reduce pressure on the grid, but it cannot just be a self-serve resource, or we're going to wind up, I think, cutting off our nose to spite our face in the long term.
Well, didn't Texas just pass a bill?
Yeah.
SB 8 or
8-6. Wait, should we say 6-7?
I don't. Yeah.
Thank you.
We went there. Holy cow. Okay.
But it's not just Texas.
10-year-old to be proud.
It's all governments locally. I think the point there is rising, I would say, concern regarding the impact of data centers or I would say non-commercial consumer assets and their demand, which is driving up prices. So Jason's points regarding sort of having a negative load growth or having that impact is spot on. Like some of our, like the work, I think Jennifer, you mentioned is, some of it is self-induced, like AI data centers actually causing a large demand in power, but we are using AI tools to sort of solve that, as well as do conscious investments in nuclear, as well as other, I would say, non-traditional data sources as well.
Well, and as we saw this morning too, the investments in the actual data center too, as far as the cooling technologies and how to reduce that. And to Jason's point earlier, it's a system-wide approach, right? It's not one point that is driving the load.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I would think from a planning perspective, it actually makes it very challenging. If you have this distributed generation that's becoming more and more pervasive, or at least people are having that thought process. Are you like, what is the time horizon by which you start to bake it into your overall kind of plan of generation?
In terms of that backup resource being meaningful, right now. I mean, it's I think from a supply planning perspective, and I'm providing a California perspective here. We as we've done kind of our pathways modeling and looking at the state of California and our service area, it was always the case that in 2040, to get that last mile, or the last 10 or 20% towards net zero, we're going to need some unnamed breakthrough in technology, right? Whether it was CCUS or small modular nukes or geothermal or hydrogen or you name it. I think all of us from a planning perspective was like, that's the someday maybe thing. The thing we're now seeing is with the data center load coming online, those solutions are pulled forward by at least 5 years, and in some cases a decade. So we have, in California, we think about 5 years of runway to kind of effectively keep doing what we're doing. Procuring solar and storage at scale, bringing these data centers line in the right places. In order to meet the load and continue the growth we've been talking about, we're going to need other solutions, and we're going to need, this is back to your question, we're going to need that backup resource to actually show up at scale to help alleviate the peak and help serve as a grid resource. In the CAISO, our friends at the CAISO would say this is like a 40 or 50 hour a year problem. It is very solvable, but so we've got to find a way to put those resources to use to help solve those 40 or 50 hours a year.
Very good.
Today.
Very good. So let's risk, Niraj. So a lot of times, you hear a lot about digital. It's one of the core tenets in terms of how Schneider Electric wants to help solve this conundrum around the energy transition. So there was a recent cyber breach that was pretty on the headlines. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then secondarily, how you get utilities comfortable as they're looking to employ this sort of technology?
So I'll probably start with the second one and come back to the latest ones in the headlines, right? I mean, I think when we started early on in the cloud journey, about 10 years ago, there was a lot of, I would say, customer feedback. It's like, hey, we are not sure whether we can trust our own sort of workloads into cloud. We are more comfortable running our own data centers. And now you transpose that to today's world where Microsoft's assets, the amount of signals we get daily are tremendous. It's like about 100 trillion signals a day, which is like more than 1 billion signals a second, right? And it only takes one signal to go bad to have a cyber event. And the amount of, I would say, intelligence we gain, amount of knowledge we gain, we've been able to sort of transpose that into a platform, into a sort of a security co-pilot, as well as other learning, so that we can sort of alleviate and mitigate some of these events rather than a customer having their own data center. I mean, if they choose to, that's fantastic. We still work with them, but we want to make sure we alleviate their security concerns on the cloud. And coming back to your earlier point, I mean, we were discussing today, in the morning I was reading about, we had a Cloudflare outage, but in not so related ones, 2 weeks ago, Microsoft was hit with about a 15.7 terabits DDoS attack, terabits per second, right? But more than 500,000 IoT events were hijacked by a separate bot company. I think it was Asurius, and I might be mangling that name out. And it's been sort of going around the block. But the most important thing was we were able to alleviate that within seconds. It happened in Australia. It had minimal amount of impact. And if you think about that huge, massive impact and the ability that our customers were able to sort of leverage our own knowledge and tools is sort of a really heartwarming thing to say. I mean, again, cyber attacks happen every day. Last 4 years, the number of cyber attacks on utilities have tripled. So it's important that we partner with our customers in our learning journey together. It's not like one knows better than the other, but we can sort of make this a much more safer and a secure place here.
So I'm going to marry that with the hardware, right? And really looking at the assets and making sure, as Jason talked about, with wildfire mitigation and utilizing those tools, but it's also utilizing the tools that are available, whether it's cameras or whatever that may be, to protect your substations, to protect your generation too, and making sure that that's tied in with your security.
There's something, as you mentioned in terms of the recovery there, just this idea of fail-safe capacity. We talk about that in the workforce, but how do we create cyber fail-safe capacity? Obviously this industry for a long time with protection settings and thinking about avoiding system-wide blackouts and so on and so forth has been attuned to avoiding single points of failure. I think we have to bring that same mindset that we brought to the bulk power system and to the workforce into the cyberspace. Because, a lot of the solutions we're talking about here to meet the demand,
right,
increase our risk front. And that's just the reality of it. And so we've got to find a way to make sure we fail safe.
Yep. Good. And then maybe one more for you, Jennifer. So in terms of the hardware side,
yes.
So as one of the leading EPCs in the country, can you talk a little bit about that? So there's been, extended lead times, and that's kind of persisted as a little bit of a hangover that we'd never quite kind of worked through. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk a little bit about that from your perspective and maybe some strategies around mitigating some of those?
Well, the sooner the better, right? Mm-hmm. But it's also the partnerships, right? And really understanding from what the clients, what is motivating the client to what they think is speed to market, right? And can we phase that in, but then also working with all the manufacturers and Schneider and understanding, well, what is the lead time and how can we work around this or together to develop those solutions? And, some of our developer friends, their timelines aren't as realistic as what they would like, given, we've talked about the regulatory potential challenges. We've talked about community engagement. And so at times those go hand in hand, right? And so by the time you do get your site ready for the equipment to be delivered, it's not terrible. But it's also that education process too, of making sure that everyone understands that. And it is interesting because we are now seeing very interesting partnerships in order to make more equipment accessible into the U.S. specifically, especially with some of the tariffs. And so, again, I think that mindset of thinking outside the box and thinking of those solutions that, I'll just say 36 months ago, we didn't have to, right? But it's fun. It's really fun to try and develop these type solutions and think, and now we're making partnerships that, we wouldn't have thought of in the past.
Yeah. And in order to address some of these challenges, so affordability, and I think you started talking to this, Jason, is always come like, who pays for this? You have more and more load growth that's coming. How does that ultimately get distributed and paid for? Can you expand a little bit from your vantage point, kind of how you guys are managing through that?
Well, it is a daily battle. I would say, one of the things, the good news we had to report at PG&E is that rates have actually come down this year. They're stabilizing and coming down further over the next couple of years, which I think is welcome news to our customers after, what's been a very difficult environment. So in a world where I think nationally the average utility rates are up 8%, something in that zone, high single digits, we're actually coming down. Admittedly off a high base from a rate perspective, but our bills, at least for residential customers, our bills were like fourth or fifth lowest in the nation relative to disposable income.
Okay.
One of the things that we're grappling with is, frankly, all of these bills are arriving at the same time, and not bills, but costs arriving at the same time. So we've had, the fact that as an industry, we have work to do on aged infrastructure. That's not unique to us. Mm-hmm. We have these climate resilience investments, whether it be wildfire or otherwise, and then this load growth all happening at the same time. One of the biggest things we're really focused on is getting out of kind of very traditional programmatic widget by widget upgrades. So I do a pole 1 month, and then I reconductor the next month, and then I replace the transformer the next month. And that's not actually cartoonish. Like, that is what happens sometimes. Maybe not month to month, but year to year. And being able to shift to a paradigm where we get what I like to call the 2-fers and 3-fers, where we can go look, say, on the distribution system and say, okay, we've got all this work that needs to be done in the next 5 years. Let's schedule it. Let's turn it into a bundled project. Let's blitz it with 10 crews over the course of 2 or 3 days. We roll fewer trucks. We can direct job site, deliver the materials and make sure we have them. We can get the permits once, and we can take the customers on an outage only once. And so you think about that and go, well, that just makes sense. Why don't we just do that as a matter of course? It requires a lot of planning and choreography, and that's frankly different from how we've worked in the past. But when we work in that way, we can see anywhere from 30% at the low end savings to 80 to literally 90% savings off of where we've been historically. So that's a huge focus for us, is being able to, as we call it, integrated grid planning, being able to, in a bundled package, engineer and then execute those projects.
Very good.
And we've seen some of our other utility partners look at their delivery in the same way, right? And maybe it's looking at construction packages in the same geography because that's easier for mobilization for the contractors. But again, really looking at it as a holistic and not piece by piece.
I'll just add to that. I mean, I think from our side, it's probably Jason, you are probably closer to the consumer, actually, in terms of the actual bill with the say. But from our side, it's working with partners like Schneider, right? So we just released that whole total cost of ownership, right? Regarding how are you sort of trying to migrate for every utility, their data estates, what's the cost for making it on-prem versus, let's say, taken to the cloud. What are some of the business values of AI? It's not just AI for AI's sake, but how can it help reduce your time, the cycle time? And all of the optimizations, Jason, you mentioned, are predicated based on some data sets. And how do you optimize? How do you choreograph? I love the word choreograph. It's like, how do you actually dance around this thing and get it right? And it's not get it right one time. It's getting right in a continuous stream, right? Because there are new events happening and how we are reacting to it in a holistic manner.
Very clear. So we're running a little bit low on time, so I'm going to put one question out to all of you guys. So if you guys had to identify one barrier as we're going kind of this grid modernization that you would highlight. Of course, there are many, but if you were going to highlight one, and Niraj, I'll start with you. What would that one barrier be that you would try and remove and isolate?
I think the barrier is, or I will flip it, is rapid collaboration. Like, the pace is just on us, right? And it depends on whichever aspects of collaboration we can work on. But we need to, it's a relentless collaboration around all the problem sets we are trying to do. Having that collaboration mindset is going to help us remove these, the amount of change or the time it takes. It cannot just go from every 2 years to a planning cycle. It has to sort of be on a continuous journey together. Right? So that's that barrier, which if we start focusing on, we'll be able to deliver value to our customers right away.
Yeah, I love that message, because to me, it comes back to this whole ecosystem message, right? You have to have the stakeholders around the table in order to work through the solutions. Jennifer, same question.
So collaboration, but in a different matter, looking multi-state, right? Multi-jurisdiction for large transmission projects, let's say, and accelerating the ability for that connectivity. And again, respecting everyone's input and the regulatory requirements, but that can't be that hindrance. And you know, we've seen from a federal standpoint, there is some permit reforms and things like that, but it's more than just permitting, right? It's the understanding, and Jason had talked about this too, but the understanding of these projects and these multi-state projects are good for all, even if it's going through your backyard and you may not see that direct benefit, it is a benefit overall, and we should be able to share some of those cost savings. So I think it's that collaboration from a slightly different perspective?
I'll maybe offer a slightly more philosophical answer, but I think that collaboration in service of trust. I think that we're in an environment where trust in large-scale institutions has been on a steady decline, and we're asking. On the one hand, energy has never been more top of mind for customers and stakeholders, and on the other, it's never been more of kind of less top of mind. If you're trying to feed your family or keep your small business afloat or navigate, global trade and other dynamics. And so I think our ability to have this idea of a say-do ratio of 1 and use all this data and intelligence to communicate effectively with customers is so key. The example you're talking about is at minimum a 5 to 7 year multi-$100 million infrastructure project, maybe 10 or 12 or 15.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah.
No, we're aiming for 5 to 7. I know we're not there yet, I assure you. But we're asking, everyone in our stakeholder environment to kind of let us help lead them into a future that's never existed at a time when institutional trust is at its lowest. And so I think about in the scheme of things, small but important wins where working with partners like Schneider, we can push out outage notifications and better automated intelligence to help a customer understand when they're going to get back online. Like that's just a microcosm for me of how do you have the right type of kind of, again, say-do ratio of 1 that builds trust and earns the right to go deliver the multi-year, multi-$100 million project and rebuild our infrastructure. I think that's a big task for us.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for 1 or 2 questions. So we have an esteemed panel here. Any questions before we, right here in the front. There's a mic coming.
Well, more. Yeah. Where did Michael Gretzky? He still got Michael. Man. So, he wanted to get everything. Just, which he and Rick, there is a smart man.
You talk about your
Yeah.
global, and I can talk locally.
Yep. So, yes.
Did you guys hear the question?
Microgrids.
Yeah, so for the benefit of you guys who couldn't hear, the question was around microgrids and what role do they play in addressing this modernization topic. So, Jen.
Yep. Yeah. So you had said, is it just for like wildfires or resilience? It is one of the solutions for resilience. It is a solution for speed to market, right? It is a solution for end of line, right? Where you cannot necessarily, it's not economical to provide that solution. And so the strategy is really looking at what are the needs, what are the costs, and how quickly do they need to be implemented. And so, and that's not just US, that's a global, we're seeing that, I'll just say with mining, right? With the resurgence in mining and how are we getting the power that they need at the end of the line.
Yeah, I would add, from our perspective as a utility, we see a role for microgrids. Certainly, I mentioned earlier the remote grid solution as a complement to the grid. Just from a technical perspective, particularly as you push more and more of the energy in our economy and our lives into electricity, it's already untenable to go just self-serve. Right, when you think about in the residential case, 2 electric cars at 80 to 100 kilowatt hours in the battery, like you can't possibly put enough solar on your roof to deliver the energy needed to go live your life. And so there's always going to be a role for the network, and frankly, microgrids need the economics of the network to make them work. But we do see places where for resilience they can augment the network.
Excellent. Okay, so today we heard a number of things around grid modernization. So grid modernization in terms of kind of thinking about how we address the massive load growth, thinking about how major events, or at least was one of the topics that came up, as well as some of the supply chain challenges that persist, and then importantly, what role digital plays in it. So very excited. I think we have a big challenge ahead of us, but I think that we're up to it. To me, the time is now. So this is the most important message. So with that, we'll release our panelists and say thank you.